this programme, but do get in touch if your television has been affected. Email us, youandyours@bbc.co.uk. Now, this month, the government has launched a review of the way NHS complaints are handled, and the results of that review should be available in the summer. Until then, hospital trusts are free to define their own policies for dealing with complaints, and inevitably this can be different for each hospital. Andrew Brown complained after treatment at his local hospital, Worcestershire Royal, and later found that he'd been labelled a vexatious complainant, which meant the hospital could refuse to deal with any further complaints from him. Vexatious can refer to someone who sends excessive amounts of correspondence, refuses to accept their complaint has been dealt with, or keeps bringing up new, unrelated complaints. It also covers complainants who are abusive. Well, Andrew Brown told me when he first heard how he was being described.
The vexatious complainant label was notified to me in early January 2012. I had a letter through the post. That was the first that I knew of it, and I was really quite shocked by that, surprised, especially when I read the policy as well.
The reason cited in the Trust's letter, I've got the quote in front of me here, was that you have been unwilling to accept documented evidence of treatment given and insisted that you've not had an adequate response in spite of large volumes of correspondence specifically answering your questions. How do you deal with that charge?
Well, with that charge, well, actually, when you actually read that letter, it's not exactly very specific. And I remember thinking, well, what are they referring to? Because it actually referred to the letter about in October, which was a complaint I made, which is a very simple complaint about an appointment I had at ear, nose and throat, but it wasn't exactly large volumes of correspondence. The other complaint that I had at the time, which had been made in August, was a complaint I made about cardiology. You know, I just got this status out of the blue, no kind of warning letter, nothing, anything of the sort, really. And
but the cardiologist you dealt with over that first situation, did he not describe you as a prolific letter writer?
Yes, he did. He did describe me as that. Yep, that's right.
Was every single letter absolutely necessary?
Well, I mean, obviously at the time I perceived it to be absolutely necessary, or I wouldn't have done it. But they have removed my vexatious status, so one presumes that it's agreed that I haven't acted unreasonably.
And tell us why that happened, because that came about after an appeal, didn't it?
Yes, I appealed, but initially when I was given the status, there was no right of appeal, and I kind of petitioned the Trust about that. They reviewed it. They then granted the right of appeal, which I used, and my appeal was successful.
And was that the end of the matter for you, or are you still pursuing this in a different way?
Yeah, because I think it's unfinished business to a point. It's substantially resolved now because they've actually removed the aspects of the policy that talked about telling horror stories about one's experience at the hospital to all and sundry, and such activity as exhibiting attention-seeking behaviour, invoking the MP, the Secretary of State for Health, or the Prime Minister's office. I felt that those sort of things were wrong.
How, though, do we strike a balance here? Because you would, I'm sure, acknowledge that there are occasions when people, frankly, complain for the sake of it. They don't have much of a case, and ultimately they become a bit of a nuisance.
It's a difficult balance, but what I do feel is that more efforts could be made when people make complaints to sort of take the heat out of it and actually meet up with people. You know, I realise that a public health service has limited time, but I think that people should have an avenue to ask questions and raise concerns and be as unencumbered as possible in doing that.
Andrew Brown. Well, Penny Venables is the Chief Executive of the Trust, which oversees Worcestershire Royal.
I think that although there is advice from the Cabinet Office and the Ombudsman, every single hospital trust will have its own separate policy with slightly different nuances. And certainly when I arrived at the Trust, which was in the January, and the decision to apply the status to Mr. Brown had been made in the December, firstly, it was routine time to review the complaints policy, and this is a very small section of the complaints policy. We reviewed that policy at that stage, and it was clear to me that there was not that system of early warnings in place, which certainly I was used to having in previous organisations.
So that policy was not fit for purpose, to put it bluntly?
I wouldn't say that it was not fit for purpose. And actually, when you do have sets of policies within organisations and within hospitals, you have to constantly review them.
Is it not, though, true to say that the Trust has only ever had 2 vexatious complainants, and when you review the policy, you remove the label from both of them, which implies that the initial policy was at fault?
Well, if I could just clarify in terms of the removal of the status, we did revise the policy, and I actually took the decision to give the right of appeal to the 2 individuals concerned, because if they had been judged against the revised policy, they obviously would have had that warning.
Andrew Brown referred to two definitions in the policy, which I know are not there anymore. One was those who tell horror stories to, quote, all and sundry, and the other was those that display attention-seeking behaviour, such as going to their MP. They've gone now, have they?
They have gone. I mean, at the time that Mr. Brown raised his initial concerns with us about the status, the issue about the content of the policy and those particular definitions weren't raised with us.
But was it ever attention-seeking behaviour to go to your MP when you had a legitimate concern about what your hospital had done?
No, and I think just to put it in context, the policy would never have been applied in that way. And just to make it clear, this was never one of the reasons why Mr. Brown was considered under the terms of the policy.
People have got to have confidence in this, haven't they? I mean, the last question I posed to Andrew Brown was about striking the balance. You have to strike the balance. People like him has to strike the balance. Have we got that balance now?
I believe we have. We do need that balance, Julian, because also, if I think of some of the very rare examples that I have dealt with over 30 years, some of these cases do involve completely unreasonable behaviour, like stalking of individual staff, threats of abuse and physical violence to staff, which quite clearly is unacceptable, and we do have to have a measure in place to make sure that we can take action against that.
And if the government review ends up in a national policy, would you welcome that?
I would welcome that. We consistently review our complaints processes, procedures, and how we handle complaints received.
Penny Venables, well now Andrew Brown, also approached the Patients Association earlier this year, and they agreed to write a letter to both Penny Venables and the Health Service Ombudsman in support of the points that he was making at that stage. Dr. Mike Smith is the Vice Chair of the Patients Association. Good afternoon. What is it about Andrew's initial complaint that concerned you?
Well, it seemed that they just weren't listening, as they should have done, and then they turned it into a vexatious complaint. Now, everybody who has a helpline, and we the Patients Association certainly do, you have to have a policy to deal with vexatious calls, but that it should be used to make you a vexatious complainant when you have to go to your local MP or councillor, which is the standard practice in a variety of other places, seems to be too far. And I mean, Francis, fortunately, that Francis report on the mid-staff and all the troubles that have been going on up there, he was able to say, as part of the process, that the Patients Association standard for vexatious callers, that's ours, should be rolled out across the country. So there we are. We seem to have got it right.
When you listen to Penny Venables, she was saying that we have now removed elements of the initial definition of a vexatious complainant. For example, the reference to the MP has now gone. You would presumably welcome that.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I couldn't go into the details of that. You'd lose half your listeners, because it would be, anything to do with the process in the NHS now goes into umpteen pages. But you have to pick out the gist of it. And suffice it to say that there will be people who are off the wall, as Penny was saying, and making totally unreasonable suggestions. But then if they were to go to the MP would pick that up too. But anyway, I mean, the detail, anybody can have it, I'm sure, online if they send Patients Association, patients-association.com, or phone the helpline 0845 608 4455, and that will get them a copy if that's what they would like to see.
Let me take you back to what you hinted at a moment ago, because, as I mentioned, there is the government launching a review of the way NHS complaints are handled. At the moment, we'll get results of that review available in the summer. If, as I said to Penny Venables, we end up with a national policy which everybody has to adhere to, is that a better way forward here?
Yeah, as long as you don't, follow the line of getting things right instead of doing the right thing. When you've got people involved, Julian, there are always going to be ways of looking at these policies and saying, well, this isn't fair on the individual. So given that proviso, then it is a good thing. I think that's excellent. But also, trusts, or they've just changed again the 1st of April instead of the current commissioning groups, they have to listen to concerns. It's very slow, as we know. People phone us on the helpline and tell us how long ago they made a concern, and they haven't had a reply from the trust, from the individual, for whoever it is they've written to in a high place. That's not good enough. It implies, indeed, that the trusts are not listening. And, if your concerns suddenly go up, your complaints, that is, and if you've seen that compared with a month or 3 months ago, they've suddenly doubled, there's something going wrong. And if you're onto that quickly, you save lives.
Just as a final thought, I'm reading this comment from somebody who's listening to the conversation in advance of us talking about it. There's a growing group of people, they say, who believe their complaints are not being taken seriously. This is because so many NHS staff, writes this person, are unable to see what may seem a small matter to them is a huge matter to the person stuck in a bed.
Yeah. Well, get on to us. Get on to our helpline. which is, as I say, 0845 608 4455, and our volunteers and staff will do their best to help. And it's our 50th year this year, so formed all those years ago when people first started to get concerns that weren't being dealt with. The Patients Association was formed, and I just hope we can help. But as I say, to hear that there is going to be a national policy trotted out is a good move.
Dr. Mike Smith, Vice Chair of the Patients Association, many thanks.
I'm here at the London